page, we must understand that each element has a default behavior that controls its relationship to the page as a whole. Some HTML elements that you've seen so far are block-level elements. This means they take up the full width of the page by default. Other elements are inline elements, and this means that if the width of the page is wide enough, they'll slide up and stack next to each other. This will make so much more sense with an example. I already have a pre-written example here to show you the difference between a block level and inline element. I've written some CSS that will visually distinguish the elements from one another, but that you don't need to write yourself at this point in the course. So I'm going to go ahead and hide the CSS. It's just what adds the orange background color to each of these paragraphs. Look at the HTML because it's more important here. You'll notice I have 3 paragraphs and 3 images. The image sources are pretty long, so don't worry too much about that. But each image has a source attribute, alt attribute, and a title attribute. There's nothing that separates these paragraphs from one another, right? Like they're just each written on a separate line, 1, 2, 3. And the same is true for the images. Even if the lines are a lot more long, one is written on line 5, one is written on line 6, and one is written on line 7. However, you'll notice that each paragraph automatically appears on its own line and takes up the full width of the page, which is visible via the orange that I've added in CSS. You'll notice, though, that the images slide up next to one another without me specifying that they should. This is because paragraphs are block-level elements and images are inline elements. Just note that block-level elements that you've seen in this course so far include headings like H1, H2, H3, paragraphs, lists, including list items themselves, and structuring elements like header and nav. Inline elements that you've seen include images, strong text, emphasized text, and links, meaning that all of this will appear sort of stacked next to each other. None of these inline elements will appear on their own lines by default. If you're seeing weird visual behavior and you don't understand why certain elements are appearing next to each other instead of stacked, it's because they have a default block level or inline property that you can change later via CSS. It's just important to be aware of it now when working with HTML elements themselves.